Yeah, so back on the job. First of all, my regards. Good evening to all my seniors, dear friends. This evening, we are talking something very updated, which has almost spoiled the whole globe, all the world. And we are organizing this session under Scientific Committee Society Epicon 2019 in association with the Indian College of Physicians. And this is a medical update 17. This is all under the auspices of Dr. K.K. Parikh, sir, who is the chairperson, Dr. Giriji Mathur. And this time we'll be talking about managing post-COVID patients and preparing for the third wave. So let me introduce our subject to a little while. So first of all, our congratulations to the javelin throw, Neeraj Chopra and our team. After a long span of time, we have so many medals and gold medals. Now, what we have been talking about, this small virus, which is rather is inactive otherwise, but once it gets to human cells, it becomes active and tries to multiply intracellular. And that's the reason that is not been identified. Initially, it was a Wuhan or CCP or a novel coronavirus 2, which later on became alpha, beta, delta, now delta plus, and now we are having a kappa, and this is a lambda virus. So this is a coronavirus, different mutants. They have a highly transmissible. It is all understood. Over a period of time, the spike protein is getting more stronger and stronger. That is upgrading is there, getting stronger, more transmissible. Severity of illness is high, and vaccine efficacy is getting down with the different strains now. So once we see the post-COVID pulmonary fibrosis, there have been a lot of discussions. Now we'll be highlighting this evening. And we understand the post-COVID pulmonary fibrosis as our COVID haulers or long haulers. We understand the virus damage the lungs. We understand these photos. And there's a last stage is a honeycombing and traction bronchiectasis takes place. Now respiratory exercise does make a difference. Position makes a difference. Now we are having the biggest $1 million question is third wave. Are we going to have a third wave? Yes or no? If we have, then what could be a size of this all? According to the virologist, Dr. Gagandeep Kang, she says the third wave will be like a hill. If the second wave is like a steep mountain, there will be a third wave, but much on a smaller size. And what the R number will be? We are understanding the R number is increasing over day by day. Virus outbreaks worsen this month. There we are having a breakthrough infections also. Once the people are taking a vaccine after 2-dose vaccine, but some of the people develop corona infection, that is a breakthrough infection. Delta on steroids, the Times of India. Lambda, Delta plus, Dr. Fauci again has certain comments. So DNA explainer, comparative study of Delta, Delta plus, Kappa, Lambda variants. And now, are we going to have a mask? Number one, or even a double mask? Because higher the transmissibility, we may have to have a double mask. Let's here understand. And what could be the recent scenario, the Adar Poonawalla meeting the health minister, Mansukh Mandaviya, number waves doesn't matter, the potential third wave is coming. Children in ICU pile up with more COVID cases. This is a United States, Florida story. This is an 8th August from the Fox News. The children ICU pile up with COVID cases. A record number of Florida children are hospitalized with COVID-19 on Tuesday than any other state in the United States. Mixed Covishield and Covaxin yields better results. ICMR study. So now back on the job. So I will request Dr. K.K. Parikh, sir, to kindly give us blessings so we can initiate our meeting, sir. Dr. K.K. Parikh, sir.
Good evening, friends. On behalf of Scientific Society Committee, I It's my privilege to welcome all of you, all delegates who are attending today's webinar, and our learned speakers, Dr. G.C. Khilnani, Dr. Agam Vora, and Dr. Ghanshyam Pankti, and all members of Scientific Committee Society. Scientific Committee Society is committed to disseminate knowledge to all our colleagues, physicians, and general practitioners, even those who are living at a very peripheral region. And we have seen the impact of these CME programs, which are being organized virtually in learning and updating our knowledge to a great extent. Today, we have lectures and interactions on how we are prepared for the third wave, what is our expected, what is the expectation for the third wave, will it come or not, or how we will deal it if it comes. So we have very learned pulmonologist of country, Dr. G.C. Khilnani, Dr. Agam Vora, and Dr. Ghanshyam Pankti. And without wasting much time, I hand over the proceedings to Dr. Girish Mathur.
Thank you, sir. Honorable Dr. K.K. Parikh, sir, past President API, my mentor, teacher, guide, Dr. Pradyuman Sharma, Dr. G.D. Ramchandani, the very respectable Dr. G.C. Khilnani, highly acclaimed respiratory disease specialist of the country, Dr. Agam Vora, renowned pulmonologist from Mumbai, Dr. Ghanshyam Pankti, professor in medicine, Lady Harding Medical College, New Delhi, Dr. Shivendu, Dr. Naval, Dr. G.S. Solanki, Dr. Rampal, and friends and colleagues. Very good evening to all. After the horrific experience of second wave of COVID-19 in the months of April and May, there was a consistent decline in number of COVID cases across the country. But the increasing trend in some of the states, especially Kerala, Maharashtra, and North state, has sounding alarm bells about the impending third wave of the country. Whether there will be a third wave, and if yes, when and how severe it will be, the question haunting the minds of all health experts and even the ordinary citizens of the country. To answer our queries and doubts, we have a panel of distinguished specialists in the field of COVID management. We have with us Dr. G.C. Khilnani, Dr. Ghanshyam Pankti, and Dr. Agam Vora. First, Dr. Khilnani will deliver a talk on the post-COVID patients and preparing for the third wave, and then we'll have a panel discussion. Let me first introduce our eminent faculty. Dr. G.C. Khilnani is not new to us. He is very kind to accept our invitation every time we invite him. Dr. Khilnani is Chairman, PSRI Institute of Pulmonary Critical Care and Sleep Medicine. As a former Professor and Head, Department of Pulmonary Critical Care and Sleep Medicine, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. He is a Fellow of American College of Chest Physicians. He is a Fellow of National Academy of Medical Sciences, past President National College of Chest Physicians, has more than 250 publications in national and international journals. Above all, he is an alumni of SMS Medical College, Jaipur. Dr. Ghanshyam Pankti is a Professor of Medicine at Lady Harding Medical College, New Delhi. He is the Associate Editor, API Textbook of Medicine, 9th, 10th, and 11th edition. He published more than 100 index and non-index articles in reputed journals and books. He is an executive member of Delhi API, Delhi IRA. He is a Joint Secretary, Indian College of Physicians, Dean's Place. We also have with us Dr. Agam Vora. He is a chest physician and medical director of Advanced Multi-Specialty Hospital, Mumbai. He is also in charge of Vora Clinic at Borivali West, Mumbai. He is Honorary General Secretary of Academy of Advanced Medical Education Dr. Agam Vora was conferred Young Scientist Award by Tuberculosis Association of India. He was awarded many orations and national conferences, and he is a recipient of various fellowships. I welcome all the eminent faculty of this evening. First of all, I request Dr. G.C. Khilani sir for his talk.
So good evening, sir. My seniors, am I audible?
Yes.
All right. So at the outset, I would like to thank my seniors, Dr. Parekh, Dr. Girish Mathur, Dr. Ramchandani, and not to forget Dr. Pradyuman Sharma, who is zeal for pursuing academic medicine has actually, and I am not an out part of this group actually, and it makes me feel amongst you all and gives me from the other webinars which I might be conducting. Also, the affection that you shower upon me it touches me a lot and makes me do better and better. And I'm proud to be alumni of SMS and also of Rajasthan. And it's amazing to know that Dr. Parekh, as a past president, did a tremendous academic job in pursuing now. And now Dr. Girish Mathur, I congratulate him for being elected as president of API, coming from the same city. It's a pride moment for all of us. So I've been asked to talk is post-COVID management. For I have an internist who has taken. So we'll put all our money on disco just to talk about.
Sir, there is a lot of difference.
आपका इंटरनेट कनेक्शन ठीक नहीं है सर.
Sir, disturbance
Dr.
बहुत है,
Khilani,
One meeting had to be. Yes, sir.
आपका जरा सा इंटरनेट गड़बड़ कर रहा है.
sir. Disturbance है, sir.
There is some problem with your audio, sir.
Okay, I'll just check.
कनेक्शन वीक हो रहा है.
Is it better now, sir? Audible?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So I was trying not to use this wire. So what I'm going to do is
नहीं सर, गड़बड़ हो रहा है सारा.
5 minutes or so.
आवाज आ नहीं रही.
Give an overview of.
Sir, audio ठीक नहीं है, sir. Internet connection में कुछ problem. Some
कुछ
problem with internet.
वो ले लो सर, मोबाइल का ले लो आप मेरे ख्याल से.
Is it better now?
हाँ, हॉट
Now it's
स्पॉट ले
better,
लो.
but there is some problem then when you start.
Is it better now?
Yes, sir. Now it's much better. Sounds much better.
Okay. So what I'm going to do in next 20-25 minutes is talk about the overview of COVID, where we are, especially the post-COVID part of the, and so to start with some data. The new cases in all over the world, people thought that June we were cruising, but actually we are not cruising. Then again it is going up. There are 571,320 cases, daily cases all over the world. Then United States, which had come down to less than 10,000. And then in the month of May, they had stopped masking. They were traveling, everything was open. They started enjoying their nightclubs and are actually in trouble today. And yesterday there were 1,65,000 cases in the United States. If you extrapolate it to India, it becomes 7 to 8 lakhs cases per day. So what we are talking about today is managing post-COVID complications. We will talking about vaccination status, especially the merits and demerits. We'll touch upon Delta and Delta plus variants and Lambda, and then we finally talk about third wave, which will be more in the form of discussion rather than a didactic lecture. So coming to the long-term sequelae or long COVID that we talk about, why we are talking about long COVID is because today, as of now, there are 3 crore 10 lakh cases of post-COVID. And these are documented post-COVID, but actual number is much higher. And this is because not everybody is tested, not everybody is diagnosed, and you would all agree with me that this number could be 2 to 5 times more than this. So there's a large pool of people who have recovered from COVID, and we have not yet reached 10% of complete vaccination so far. So I start with my presentation with the email which I received about 1.5 months back from a pediatric intensivist who is working in Muscat, saying that I am a pediatric intensivist care at Muscat. I had mild moderate COVID 7 weeks ago when I visited India to attend last rites of my father who died of COVID. However, I still continue to have symptoms of pain and heaviness in the left side of the chest, daily headache, intermittent lightheadedness, easy fatigability, and sleep disturbances. I consulted a pulmonologist and the cardiologist. The pulmonologist did a CT, he said, which is all right. PFT was normal. 6-minute walk test did not show any desaturation. Echo and cardiac enzymes were normal. However, I still not able to resume my full work, as a couple of hours of work makes me feel giddy and totally exhausted and leads to worsening of symptoms. In fact, I felt more sick post-COVID than during acute phase. Work demands are high. My colleagues are struggling. I am not able to help them with my patient, and it is very frustrating and depressing. And let me promise you, my friend, that this is not the only person who is ailing from this. The post-COVID problems could be, and that is what we call as long COVID. When it occurs 3 weeks after the COVID onset, it is called long COVID. If it persists beyond 100 days, we call it chronic COVID. So this was a study from Italy, which might have mentioned last time, when after 2 months of being discharged from hospital, when they were asked, are they feeling all right? Only 12% said that they are completely all right. 44% felt that they were worsening quality of life, and symptoms were from fatigue to dyspnea to joint pain to cough. I need not recite them, we know them all. And this is not because of the virus. This is because of the inflammation and other immune reaction. There's a deconditioning, and there are mental factors such as post-traumatic stress and also the effect of steroids. And none of the system is spared. It could be dermatological, cardiac manifestation. Dr. Ghanshyam will be talking about. Diabetes, we have seen it all totally out of proportion. Neurologic, thromboembolism, gastrointestinal. People don't regain their bowel habit even 2 months after COVID. What I am really focusing today will be lung involvement, and rest we will discuss in the form of panel discussion. So this was an autopsy study from Italy and Germany. And these are the fibrous lungs from the unfortunate people who died. And it showed platelet fibrin thrombi indicative of coagulopathy in small arteries vessels of some of the patients. So this damage different from diffuse alveolar damage. And when physiological tests were done on these patients who recovered from pneumonia, 47% had diffusion capacity for lung carbon monoxide, 25% had low lung volume, and long-term follow-up is definitely required. So who is likely to develop pulmonary fibrosis? Those with advanced age, severe illness, prolonged ICU stay requiring mechanical ventilation, history of smoking and chronic alcoholism, those who have high CRP and IL-6 during hospital stay, and some of the patients we actually don't know why they developed severe lung involvement. Talking about, briefly, I'll talk about how does it cause pulmonary fibrosis. There's an inflammation. There's alveolar epithelial damage, as you can see, swelling of the cells, overexpression of cytokines, that is TGF beta and TNF alpha and IL-6, leading to fibroblast and myofibroblast activation, finally leading to excess deposition of collagen, leading to fibrosis. And if I extrapolate it to the CT scan picture, these are the ground glass opacities that you can see. This is the inflammatory stage. The inflammation increases and CT score keeps on increasing. Then the fibrosis sets in, and you can see these reticulations on your screen. And finally, there is a traction bronchiectasis, and we'll be talking about it more in detail. So how do I manage lung fibrosis? Is it steroids? Is it anticoagulation? Is there a role of antifibrotics, nintedanib and pirfenidone? Everybody is prescribing, including myself. Is there a role of physiotherapy? And that's what I am going to talk about. So I'll be showing 2-3 cases on which we'll be generate our discussion. This is a 34 years old female, unmarried, of high socioeconomic status. The only comorbidity is obesity. On 26th April, she had got COVID symptoms. She was PCR positive. 9th day, she was admitted with low oxygen, received remdesivir, steroids, and discharged on tapering dose of corticosteroids. This was a CT scan on 22nd day of illness, score of 25/25. She had pneumomediastinum. She received high flow oxygen, NRBM, and also BiPAP, but did not, thankfully, require mechanical ventilation. This is the lower cut. You can see the consolidation with air bronchogram. Not a part of lung is spared. So when she came to me on 40th day, her saturation was 93 on 2 to 3 liters of oxygen. She was unable to go to the washroom. Her TLC was slightly on the higher side. CRP was 18.6. Remember, it was 40th day of her illness. D-dimer was 2050. So I thought to myself, do I give her steroids, continuous steroid? Do I give her anticoagulants, or do I give her antifibrotic? Is there a role of aspirin, and for how long? So on 62nd day, when she consulted me, she continued on tapering dosages of steroid. She was able to go to the washroom. Her TLC was still high. She had severe fatigue. D-dimer was 1230 and CRP was normal, and ferritin was also normal. So on 75th day of her illness, she came to my OPD, was able to walk a few steps. At saturation of 98%, TLC was on the higher side, D-dimer was still on the higher side. CRP rose to 21. So I didn't know what to do. She was unfit for PFT. She was unfit for diffusion capacity. She was unfit for 6-minute walk test. So I requested for a CT and see what did it show. Almost complete resolution of lung involvement. So this was on 16th May. She had a 25/25 score, and on 10th July, almost the CT had become normal. The resting saturation was normal. She never received antifibrotics. She was on tapering dose of steroid, which had been stopped. She was receiving only small dosages of anticoagulants. And yesterday, that was 7th of August, she drove herself from Sonipat, and PFT I did, which was normal. There was mild impairment of DLCO, and she is not on any active treatment. So this was one case who recovered only on tapering dosages of steroids. And this is another case of 44 years old male, no comorbidities. He had COVID with 5 days. On 12th day, he had hypoxemia, 91% on 3 liters. And this was his CT. On 12th May, you can see dense consolidation with air bronchogram. And he was already on oxygen. And he received steroids, remdesivir, and enoxaparin. D-dimer was high, CRP was high. Quickly going on on 1 month later, he had developed this bronchiectasis. And you can see fibrotic strands all over, and he was requiring high flow oxygen. And I've enlarged it, and this is the traction bronchiectasis that we see. He was on nintedanib, he was on tapering doses of steroid, he was on anticoagulation. Still, he is requiring oxygen. So, two cases. One did not go into fibrosis. Second person went into the fibrosis. Both did not have comorbidities, and they did not fall into the group that I discussed. This is a 72 years old male father of our nephrologist, consultant nephrologist, who on 28th April had this kind of CT with COVID, 16 July without any antifibrotic, only on tapering doses of steroid based on the CRP, had near complete recovery. How do I assess these patients? There are symptoms. I record a SpO2, I do a PFT, I do a DLCO, I do a 6-minute walk test only if his resting saturation is more than 94%. If these parameters are deranged, then I do a CT scan for the follow-up, and I also do inflammatory markers like CBC, CRP, and D-dimer, and then take a call to decide about antifibrotic, of which I will be asking Dr. Agam Mora to further dissect it out, whether nintedanib or pirfenidone, what stage to start and how long to continue. These are difficult questions without any answer. Is there a role of anticoagulants, which Dr. Ghanshyam will be talking about, but we all give it. At the time of discharge, the preferred, in severe cases, the choice of anticoagulant is the newer oral anticoagulants, NOAC as they are called, rivaroxaban or apixaban. We don't know what is the role of aspirin and clopidogrel in these cases. So, although no data specific to COVID is present, but up to 5 days of prophylaxis could be considered for low bleeding risk patients with elevated VT risk due to reduced mobility or comorbidity, or say, for instance, active cancer. But whether anticoagulant will minimize the fibrosis, whether they will reduce the risk of other organ involvement, whether they will reduce the risk of cardiac event, there are no answers to that. So how do I manage long COVID? When the patient come to me, I look at the temperature, heart rate, blood pressure, everything, but there are certain things which would bother me. The worsening breathlessness, the saturation, low saturation, unexplained chest pain, new confusion, and focal weakness. These are the things which would bother me and lead to further investigation. And I always do a CBC, a C-reactive protein, and D-dimer. Ferritin I do only when there is too much of a lung involvement. X-ray unfortunately doesn't help a great deal in assessing the lung involvement, but occasionally we do it. But most of the time I have to rely on CT scans. There's a big role of exercise in this, and doing pranayam like Anulom Vilom, Bhastrika, Brahmari, and Kapalbharati, I think they help a lot. What is important to tell is that one must not indulge into heavy exercises. These people have dropped dead when they thought that they are feeling very good. They can go on heavy exercise because they are feeling good and they are marathon runners. This is absolutely detrimental, and it is recommended that for a period of 2 months from the recovery, one should only go for gentle exercise and gradually increase that. Now, finally, I will be talking about few important developments in COVID. I'll just be giving a little bit of summary before we go into the further. Everybody is worried about second infection. Everybody, I think all of you are aware, people who have got first infection and then after a few months got second infection, vaccination with or without second dose of vaccination. And this is information came from 4 million cases in the UK, and which I'll just summarize it in the interest of time. There's a low risk of COVID-19 reinfection. Out of 4 million cases, only 15,893 had possible reinfection. Most infections are asymptomatic, and no evidence that variants such as Delta are more likely to cause reinfection than others. This is actually a good news. because in India, the Sero survey that I'll be coming to it is probably in Delhi, 79% of people are already infected. So by virtue of that, the second infection, if at all they occur, they are extremely uncommon and one should not be worried. Now, a word about COVID vaccination, and that is actually important aspect of it. And we know today, yesterday, Johnson & Johnson got emergency use authorization from DCGI, and we have all these vaccines other than Pfizer and Moderna. Moderna is approved, but I think it will take some time to come. The merit of vaccination, what we have learned over last few months is that it helps you from getting seriously ill. Although we know, we are aware, but that some people have died even after receiving 2 doses of vaccine. But there's mammoth evidence that certainly mitigates the severity of illness. The efficacy of vaccine on different strain, Wuhan strain, yes, UK strain, yes, but like it doesn't, like Covishield vaccine does not work on Brazil strain. Now, a word about mixing of vaccines. And this is a recent phenomenon, Can we give Pfizer vaccine after Covishield? And only yesterday, as Dr. Pradyuman has mentioned, that a small study involving 18 patients where Covaxin was mixed with Covishield vaccine, it led to enhanced immunity. Is that the future of vaccination? This study which came in Lancet, the immunogenicity and reactogenicity of Pfizer booster after Covishield, I'll just summarize it for you. 41 healthy adults received Pfizer vaccine 8 to 12 weeks after receiving Covishield vaccine. And with the Pfizer vaccine, there was 77-fold increase in the RBD antibodies and 36-fold increase in the spike protein antibodies. So that is the kind of response you get. Another study which got published from Canada, it showed that when you give Pfizer vaccine after Covishield, the antibody level rose by 127-fold. When you gave Covishield after Covishield, the antibody level increased by 5-fold. So there's a huge difference between the immune response when you give Pfizer vaccine after Covishield as compared to Covishield after Covishield. So immune response is Covishield after Covishield, number 1. Now you can put it as number 3. Pfizer after Covishield, number 2, and Pfizer after Pfizer, number 1. This is the strength of antibody response. Another thing which has come new is booster dose, that is third dose. Why, when, and to whom? And that question has come up because we realized that people who were older, more than 60 years of age, those who were immunocompromised because of cancer, diabetes, or the transplant patient, or those who had rheumatological diseases receiving steroid, HCQ, methotrexate, so on and so forth, did not mount antibodies. And we all doctors who got ourselves tested got worried and disheartened. Oh, I don't have antibodies. I had 2 doses of Covaxin. I had 2 doses of Covishield. What do I do? Do I take a booster? So this study came on 23rd of July in JAMA. Antibody response after the 3rd dose of mRNA vaccine in kidney transplant patient. So this was 159 kidney transplant patient who did not have antibodies after 2 doses of mRNA vaccine was administered 3rd dose. And it was found that 49% of these patients, so 50% of the patients who did not mount antibodies with 2 doses of Pfizer vaccine developed mounted anti-receptor binding domain IgG response with 3rd dose of Pfizer vaccine. So this is a news. And with that, the Israel has approved 3rd dose of vaccine in their elderly population. And Israel has been one of the fastest in imbibing the developments and vaccinating 90% of their population. Now, we have now emergency use authorization of Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which has come up only yesterday. So this was a study which came in April. Safety and efficacy of single dose of Johnson vaccine, which was conducted not only in United States, but Argentina, Brazil, Chile, South Africa. So meaning thereby that people who had different kind of variants were exposed to this vaccine. And what was found in this ensemble trial published in New England Journal of Medicine was that it had 67% efficacy after 14 days, 66% after 28 days. And what is important is that hospitalization efficacy was 93% after 14 days and 100% after 28 days. This study had 40,000 participants properly followed up, and lasting immunity was seen, proven up to 8 months, and after that we really don't know, but up to 8 months an immunity lasts and safety was assured. So this vaccine is likely to hit India also, and I think this is now if I extrapolate, if you had Johnson vaccine from day one, today we have vaccinated 50 crore of our population, then they did not require a second dose. What is important is that in this study, if you go into the in-depth, that immunity actually develops starting 7th day of the dose. So the immunity starts quicker and also lasts longer. There were 2 cases, one each of Guillain-Barré syndrome and one of cerebral thrombosis, but those were considered as rare adverse effects. Otherwise, adverse effects were similar. Finally, is the third wave a reality? And that is a debate of today, which is very important. And this is where Delhi is. You know, we had a peak in April, and now we are cruising less than 50 cases a day. So can Delhi is opened up, metro is 100% working, the public transport is on, majority of markets are open. So, and US have already shown you about where it has gone after having vaccinated more than 50%. What is important is that Florida, Tennessee, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, where the vaccination was less, the number of cases were more. So there's no denying the fact wherever the vaccination rates are low, the not breakthrough, but the infection rate is high. But what is important is the mask. And this picture I showed you last time, that we were sitting on a time bomb which exploded in April. Are we going to have an explosion in September or October or never? That's a question that we are going to discuss. And why there was surge in United States? Because there is insufficient vaccination. When the surge came, the total average vaccination was 50% in US population. There was Delta variant and removal of masks and opening of public facilities. These were the 4 reasons. So where is the India? And some people thought the third wave might hit in next 6 to 8 weeks if people stop wearing masks, avoid social distancing, and ignore other COVID appropriate behavior. The IIT Kanpur has come out with this beautiful predictions. They have not taken into account the mutations. There could be 1 lakh cases, 2 lakh cases per day, or 3 lakh or 4 lakh cases a day, depending upon COVID appropriate behavior and the seropositivity. But to my mind, and this is my thought process, the predictors of third wave are COVID behavior, appropriate behavior, vaccination status, herd immunity, and variants. And this was a welcome thing, which came that 2 of 3 Indians have COVID-19 antibodies. That included children also, 6 years and plus. And various, and also rural as well as urban areas were included. So there were almost 29,000 people were studied from 6 to 17 years of age, 21 states, 71 districts. We had a seropositivity of 0.7% in May, June 2020. August, September, it was 7.1%. December, January, it was 24%, and now it is 66.7%. Huge, good information. That tells me that the third wave will not be severe. But still, there are 40 crore people in India are seronegative. Another thing is that will the COVID immunity will wane? And will the COVID variant will show its color? And last time I did talk about variant of high consequences. I am not going to talk about that will defy the diagnosis, that will defy the treatment, and maybe more contagious and more severe. Delta variant has gripped the world. We all know it has gripped more than 60 countries, and half the breakthrough infections in Canada, which came in June, were because of the Delta variant. And today in United States also, the Delta variant is the most common cause of the resurgence. Delta plus, fortunately, has not shown too much of adverse outcome, that is K417N. And this news came only 3 days back. That is of Lambda variant showing vaccine resistance detected in Louisiana. And that is actually a very worrying thing. And what is Lambda variant? Actually started in Peru and now reported in 8 countries, including USA. It has 3 mutations on spike proteins. 2 other mutations on its spike protein make it 150% more resistant to antibodies produced by vaccine. It is suspected to be either more contagious than the other strain, but this has to be seen. But it causes concern. And it has actually been found from 40 counties of the United States. So what can we do? We have to realize that airborne transmission is the reality. We realized almost a year back when WHO agreed that it's not only droplet infection, it is the airborne transmission is there. So therefore, we can vaccinate. We can change our behavior, but we can do a damn thing about mutations, which are absolutely unpredictable. So therefore, we have to put all our money on behavior and vaccination. And with that, I thank you very much for patient listening. I have tried to cover as much as I could, and we'll be listening from our experts on that.
Thank you, sir. Really very excellent and magnificent talk. We are looking forward to know these things from you, sir. Now I think we'll go for panel discussion.
So if you permit me, I'll start the panel discussion because I have communicated with. Thank you very much. And now we have two amazing experts. One hardcore pulmonologist, Dr. Agam Vora, and one astute internist, Dr. Ghanshyam, who did MD from All India Institute of Medical Sciences and continued in Delhi and done a lot of work and is associated with the Association of Physicians of India. Absolutely bright chap. So Agam, I come to you. Sorry, I doctor नहीं बोलता ये दो friend है मेरा. So Agam, ये बता. I want to tell you that I have skipped anti-fibrotic drug. In your experience, when do you consider giving anti-fibrotic drugs? Difficult question.
That's a fantastic question. At the outset, I must tell you, sir, the presentation was fantastic.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Every time I listen to your presentation, I get something new to learn. I am your student.
Thank you so much.
I would love to remain your student. I must also thank the entire team for organizing this brilliant program. Parikh sir, of course, Dr. Mathur, Dr. Sharma, and the entire API team. I feel so comfortable when I'm on API platform. Yes, the question is about antifibrotics. Trust me, antifibrotics are not required in majority of your patients. As Dr. Khilnani showed in his case, everybody here now has enough experience of managing this COVID lung diseases. And we've realized that this fibrosis is reparative fibrosis. It is not what you see in idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, where there is progressive fibrosis. We have never used antifibrotics in tuberculous lesions. We have never used antifibrotics on severe ARDSs. Then why are we using antifibrotics, like left and right in COVID-related lung fibrosis? In small proportion of patients, there is a belief or there is a feeling that it can trigger idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, or it can trigger the fibrosis what you see in IPF variety. And in only those small handful of patients, you may need antifibrotics. Sir did show in his second case where there was a patient who developed traction bronchiectasis. Trust me, most of this traction bronchiectasis would also be reversible. That is a specific feature of COVID fibrosis. But if you see those traction fibrosis, if you see shrinkage of lung volume, if you see those piles of bronchiectatic patches one after the other, the stakes of cystic lesion, what you see in periphery, in those small handful of patients, you may consider antifibrotics. But otherwise, in initial therapy, we are really, it is acting as placebo for us. And we tend to put this kind of treatment. So you see this cocktail going on in this patient. Patients are on antifibrotic drug, they're on steroid, they're on voriconazole invariably, and they are on calcium, zinc, and multiple other things. In my opinion, I would reserve antifibrotics only for those handful of patients who have progressive fibrosis. And when I get chance to do, I may not do CT scan when they present to me, because most of the information I would get on clinical grounds. I would rather do CT scan after 1 month of patients recovery, because that is the time it would tell me what is the kind of functional or what is the kind of radiological deficit this patient is left with. So that is what Sir said. Probably in this follow-up, he asked for CT scan in a couple of patients. I think that is the time to get best information on CT scan. On presentation, I would do CT scan only patient has got disproportionate symptoms. If I'm looking at pneumomediastinums, if I'm looking at pneumothoraxis, if I'm looking at something which I'm not clinically, understanding in those situations. But otherwise, for a routine case of COVID, you don't need CT scan at the baseline. You rather do it after 1 month. And that is the time you can decide about antifibrotics if the fibrosis is progressive.
So, more difficult question. What is your choice between nintedanib and pirfenidone? Please
Again, that's a very interesting question. Unluckily, we don't have head-to-head comparison of these two molecules. We have enough studies of nintedanib, we have enough studies of pirfenidone, but when it comes to head-to-head comparison, we don't have that. And in that situation, if you ask me which one to start, it depends on the convenience, it depends on availability of the molecule, it depends on doctor-drug interaction, it depends on the pill burden, etc. The only advantage of nintedanib over pirfenidone is probably the less pill burden. You give about 100 to 150 milligrams twice daily when it comes to nintedanib. When it comes to pirfenidone, the right dose would be somewhere around 1800 to 2400 milligrams a day. Luckily, we have now tablets available, which is available as 801 milligram, and you could safely use 3 times a day. Most of your patients tolerate it well. You need some time to probably titrate this. You can start with half the dose and gradually build it up. Most of your patients would do well. It takes time. So in this sense, the patient cannot tolerate pirfenidone, I would consider this patient for nintedanib. And the limiting factor for nintedanib could be the loose motion. A lot of this patient may complain of GI disturbances with nintedanib. In that situation, you have the choice of switching over from nintedanib to pirfenidone. But to my mind, there is no particular advantage of using one molecule over the other for its anti-fibrotic capacities. Thank you.
All right. So thank you very much, Agam. There couldn't have been a better description, but some people tend to choose nintedanib more than pirfenidone because we have evidence of benefit with in IPF of both the drugs. But as far as the other fibrotic diseases are concerned, namely rheumatic and collagen vascular diseases, hypersensitivity, pneumonitis, nintedanib has the Census trial 2019 published in NEJM have been done. That kind of evidence is not available with pirfenidone. And my experience is that 62% of diarrhea reported from Europe and America, we haven't seen that extent of diarrhea in our patient. So before I go to the next,
and to add to that, most of these diarrheas are self-limiting in the sense you continue treatment. Suppose if you can counsel your patient and continue treatment, in no time the diarrhea would settle. So you don't come across a situation where you have to just stop the medicine for it. You can always counsel your patient and continue. Diarrhea would settle over time.
Both the drugs you will have to do liver function
tests. Is again absolutely right. There were some trials done, and which the results were published 3 years ago, and they were looking at fibrotic ILDs. So they realized that probably, rather than looking at IPF or non-IPF and differentiating it further, if you look at whether these IPFs are fibrosing, and if you have a fibrosing variety, in that antifibrotics would work, and those studies were done with nintedanib, and hence probably nintedanib would have edge over the other molecule when it comes to evidences. Yes. Second thing is nintedanib was available at very high price, and hence a lot of people had that in mind that costlier the better. But now with a lot of generic versions available, the cost has really come down. And still, people would feel that since it was costly, it would probably mean a better drug. But that's not really so.
So, all right. So we'll switch to another aspect. So my and Agam's view is that the people, including myself, and probably were starting antifibrotic too early while the patient was in hospital because they had severe pneumonia. That's not correct. One should wait and follow these patients carefully with inflammatory markers as well as with physiologically, especially on the oxygenation. Maybe repeat a CT if the oxygen is going down or not improving. And if the DLCO is impaired, 6-minute walk test is impaired, do a CT and make a judgment from it. So Ghanshyam, now I come to you. We know that enoxaparin or anticoagulation are standard of care in moderate and severe COVID. The patients are discharged on after say. So if you have a patient moderate to severe COVID who is getting discharged, if I give you an example, suppose he is discharged on 1 liter of oxygen and he has a score of 18/25 and he is otherwise hemodynamically stable. How do you titrate the anticoagulation? What is your choice and for how long? You can take your time to,
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank you all this Rajasthan team for inviting me for this session. And as Dr. Khilnani has been my teacher, and now he's become my encyclopedia of the COVID. So he has all the knowledge. He's just as a student, he's again asking me a few more questions, although he already has all the answers. And it's almost like deja vu. I will say if Dr. Agam or Dr. Tibaskar was there, we were here for a COVID first CME, I think, sir, it was 17 February. And it was with the Critical Care Society of India with API, Dr. Arul Raj and Dr. Parikh was also there. So we were all discussing about the first wave that time. And now we are here for a third wave. And we were predicting how we will treat these patients. So that time, one of the important things was like some of the senior specialist people, they thought that hit early, hit hard will be the option for initial COVID treatment. So that time, lopinavir, ritonavir was the vogue therapy, and everyone, most of them said, okay, everyone will receive this.
Ghanshyam, can you focus on anticoagulation?
Yeah, sure, sir. So that time also we were predicting. So anticoagulant, sir, if you go with guidelines, there's a clear-cut guideline. We should only give it to moderate and severe COVID. So moderate and severe COVID and only in admitted patients. So in OPD basis, anticoagulant should be avoided. And in mild cases, asymptomatic cases, a lot of patients are getting newer oral anticoagulant should be totally avoided because a lot of side effects are there. They can be a hemorrhage and that can lead to mortality and major fertility may be there. So moderate to severe COVID, the drug of choice will be a low molecular weight heparin, most commonly uses enoxaparin. There has been studies which suggest that we should not use very high dose of enoxaparin, especially therapeutic doses. In ICU patients who are very sick COVID, there has been multi-centric trials which has shown that mortality was so high that trial was stopped in between. So what we are giving and what WHO advice, even our Indian guideline advice is, we should give prophylactic dose, maybe 0.5 milligram, either OD in mild to moderate to severe cases, and very severe cases maybe twice PD. It's like in your case, like you suggested a patient, like someone has a comorbidity, like someone has a CAD, someone is obese, diabetes, a lot of comorbidities. So in those patients, the patient is still on oxygen. So one of the cause of this thromboembolic will be a stasis. So someone who is not moving because of a nasal prong is there, he's bedridden 50% of the time, he's on bed, he's not moving, he's not doing exercise. These are the patients whose chances of DVT will be higher. So those patients, we can consider oral anticoagulant maybe for 2 to 4 weeks after discharge in like this post-COVID situation, but not more than 2 to 4 weeks. But still, if possible, low molecular weight heparin in a OD dosing will be one of the options. If you go by guidelines, BTS guidelines and NIH guidelines as well as NICE guidelines do suggest. But if you go by Indian guideline, post-discharge, there's no option for these NOAC or anticoagulant. But it's all individualized treatment. So you see your patient, see if it is if there's a high risk of bleeding, someone has a thrombocytopenia, someone is on aspirin or a clopidogrel, so their chances of bleeding is high. So you should do a scoring of bleeding. If bleeding score is not high, you may give a oral anticoagulant or a Flexin maybe for 2 to 4 weeks post
So
discharge.
Ghanshyam, you are shaking the boat actually.
Yes.
So yeah, actually shook the boat. So I would. So I'll tell you what our practice is. Moderate and severe COVID, when they get discharged from the hospital, we'll come to the steroid, but we do give them newer oral anticoagulant, apixaban or rivaroxaban for a period of 2 weeks. Call them, do a D-dimer, do the clinical assessment, and then take a call for, we do not give subcutaneous heparin on an outpatient basis, although I understand that it can be given. But we realize that there are two issues in this. One is somebody who is bedbound and morbidly ill, and we are giving anticoagulation for the as a DVT prophylaxis as any other patient. That's not we are discussing. That's not the point of. The point of discussion is COVID inflammation is a prothrombotic inflammation. In view of that, do we need to give anticoagulation for a longer time? Because as I told you, this patient, the first patient and the second patient, she had a D-dimer of 2000, then 1200, and then my problem was that this patient was partly bedbound. Even if she was not bedbound, am I doing disservice by discontinuing low-dose aspirin to her? That's a question. So here I would go away from my panelists. Any member, if he wants to give some opinion, please come forward. Just unmute yourself and say if you have any opinion.
Sir, can I make one comment? I'm Dr. Ghosh from Calcutta.
Yes, please.
About first about Agam Horaz and your comment.
Please restrict to anticoagulant.
Only. Okay.
And
But we are okay. Thank you. What we are finding, even about months together, somebody is coming with features of thromboembolic episode and with the D-dimer level extremely high, and they have already forgotten that they have COVID. By this time they are coming. So I think the anticoagulants, how much dose should be given for how long? Whether it can be years together. The patient is coming after 6 months with a high D-dimer level. So I think anticoagulants should be very, in that case, we should be very.
Okay, sir. Your point is well taken, sir. We understand that.
Yeah.
So jury is out, if anybody wants to give an opinion on this anticoagulation, any experiences? Okay, so what I would suggest is, that anticoagulation has to be individualized, number one. Number two, newer oral anticoagulants, in my opinion, should be in moderate and severe cases, should be given at least for 2 weeks. Beyond this, I make a judgment. Suppose the patient is 40 years plus, he has diabetes or whatever comorbidities, which he may anyway deserve low-dose aspirin, 75 milligram. This is my personal opinion, not from any journal, not from any book. And if his D-dimer is higher side, like 2 times the upper limit of normal, I do give them low-dose aspirin as a quackery or whatever you may say. This is my personal opinion. And Dr. Pradyuman, what do you say? Unmute yourself, please.
Unmute, Karemos.
So my personal opinion is that NOACs are to be associated if one has a diabetes or unstable diabetes, having an
I
believe I have a more favor towards NOACs, but even in case of cardiac patient, then we can have an aspirin in low dose, not otherwise.
Okay. Other thing, one has to be careful that if you are giving nintedanib, then be careful in giving newer oral anticoagulant, but there is enhanced risk of bleeding. So you need to give a lower dosages with nintedanib. So since we have more issues, and finally we'll take some questions. So I'm coming to the role of steroids after the discharge. There's no recovery trial, and several other trials have clearly shown the benefit of moderate doses of steroid in survival. But the question is, do steroids reduce the chances of fibrosis. Dr. Agam.
Yes, very much. Steroid would definitely reduce the chances of fibrosis, and you would continue steroids for a shorter duration. Now, it depends on the indication for using steroid. In most of the situation, when you use steroid in hospital patient, that is mainly to take care of their cytokine phase. And hence you would use a low dose steroid, which is 6 milligram dexamethasone or equivalent for a shorter duration, that is 7 to 10 days, or till the patient is in hospital and there is no sense in continuing oral steroids after that. Yes, you would continue oral steroids after that, provided patient has got organizing pneumonia or patient has got extensive pulmonary involvement. In those situations, you may continue it for 3 to 4 weeks. So in those situations where you have another indication, that is organizing pneumonia indication, your steroid usage could be longer. But in otherwise situation, when you are treating it for cytokine phase or the hyperimmune phase, your duration is about max 10 days, not beyond that. And dose is very low dose, 6 milligrams dexamethasone equivalent.
6 milligram dexamethasone is not a low dose. Actually, it's a full dose. That equals 40 milligram of prednisolone.
Yes, I was just about to tell everybody that people must remember the conversion. Conversion is 4 milligrams of methyl prednisolone will be equivalent to 5 milligrams of prednisolone, will be equal to 6 milligrams of deflazacort, will be equal to 0.75 milligrams of dexamethasone.
We are dealing with very senior physicians. What we are
it's about 20. Now, it's about 6 times. So when you go dexamethasone to prednisolone conversion is 6 times.
We got your point. Now I'm bringing up another issue, that you have a patient who is post-COVID, 4 weeks after he is discharged from the hospital or from home. Now he's running fever. He's terribly weak. He's feeling unwell. He's not breathless. His oxygen is all right. His temperature is 100 degrees. And then when you do CRP is 30. D-dimer is 1000 against upper limit of 500. So obviously he has got a dysregulated hyperimmune syndrome. So you give them steroid and he becomes all right. You reduce steroids, again he develops that symptom. So Ghanshyam, what would you do in such case?
Sir, this is very difficult situation, and this is again coming during second wave and third wave. So if someone with a COVID, they will develop fever. So we are a tropical country. That dengue comes into picture, you will have a lot of infection.
Ghanshyam, please stick to the rule of steroids.
So steroids are even CRP very high. It may be a sepsis also. So I will just go for a Procal first to know if it is a bacterial.
No, you have ruled out everything. Okay.
So very high CRP is infection also. So someone should be aware that CRP is not only COVID cytokine storm. So if cytokine storm is there, we should see the patient as a whole, sir. Not just like CT scan showing a lot of ground glass haze or someone score of a corridor of 15 or 20. So someone who is dyspneic, whose respiratory rate is more than like 30, 32. Someone who is having X-ray, having these pictures of something like ILD or a fibrosis. Patient is these D-dimers are high. So these all suggest that there is a cytokine storm or inflammation. We do get IL-6 and all. So steroid will be the best therapy. So what we have seen during this second pandemic was there was a lot of these patients that were coming, and if we don't treat, especially within a short time, they get intubated. So what we were doing that if someone is not improving with 2 days, 48 hours of 6 mg of dexamethasone, we did shift him to a with methylprednisolone pulse therapy. We give 250 milligram of pulse for 3 to 5 days, and a lot of intubation we did avoid these intubation. So in Delhi setting, if I discuss with my colleagues in All India Institute of Medical Science, Ram Manohar Lohia, and we have a GTB hospital, we are working with Harding. Most of them had given a pulse therapy to avoid intubation in very sick COVID patient, and we give around 250 to 500 milligram of pulse over 3 to 5 days, and everyone has not any major side effect, but improvement was there, sir. So we shifted dexamethasone to methylprednisolone pulse for very severe COVID, sir.
So, okay, Ghanshyam, thank you so much. So you have talked about 2 things. One is severe surge, that is what is called cytokine storm. But mild and moderate immune reactions are also there, which require small dosages of steroids at time. Carefully, of course, you rule out other causes of fevers and all, and then the steroids have to be given, and everybody has different kind of. Now we are switching gears. We are going away from lung. So Ghanshyam, I am coming to you. and I'm focusing on the person coming with chest pain post-COVID. The floor is yours. Tell me, how do you manage a person with chest pain?
So chest pain, like you already said, cardiac involvement, they are studying to suggest cardiac involvement in very range of post-COVID or a long COVID syndrome. So they are studying to suggest 10 to 80% of the patient may have a cardiac involvement in the form of maybe a acute coronary syndrome. They may have a heart failure. They may have a myocarditis. These all may present as a cardiac chest pain, or sometimes rarely arrhythmia, where the pain may not be there. Palpitation and diaphoresis, these all are the symptoms. But more common thing, patients are on steroids. So chest pain may be a part of a acute GERD, severe GERD. So PPI and all may be helpful. So we have to evaluate these patients. And one important thing like thromboembolic phenomena, pulmonary embolism, this is the major thing which has come in this COVID times. So we should always think about pulmonary embolism with a acute severe chest pain and these acute coronary syndrome and cardiac involvement and GERD. These three are the important things. But if we go for a UG and PG teaching, we say, okay, you should think about aortic dissection also in a acute severe chest pain, but very rare. These are rare dissection.
No, but my question, Ghanshyam, is that a person who has had COVID, he has persistent tachycardia, 100, 110, 120. And he's not a diabetic, he's not hypertensive, he's only 30 years old. How do you handle? And talk about arrhythmias associated with post-COVID.
Yes, sir. I will share my experience with some of my patients, like young female patient, are postgraduate only. She developed this persistent sinus tachycardia post-COVID, and whenever she had small activities also, this tachycardia goes up to 130, 140. So we did her ECG and all. There were no STT changes, but her markers were very high for all these. Tropi was negative, but her other markers like inflammatory markers, CRP, D-dimer were very high. We did a CT also, but myocarditis was the clinical diagnosis, and it's almost 1 month. Her tachycardia is still persistent. She is very tachypneic, and her NYHA is almost like 2 to 3. So we did give her a rest for 2 to 3 weeks, but still she has joined back, but her tachycardia is not improving. So we are planning to do a MRI. So for myocarditis, gold standard will be a catheter-based biopsy of the endocardium. But nowadays, a lot of studies are coming in which contrast-enhanced MRI can pick up myocarditis. And steroids, she is on low-dose steroid, but steroid may be the only choice which we can provide to this myocarditis patient.
So, Ghanshyam, my question is, does tropi, troponin, LDH, CPK-MB help you besides, of course, ECG and all? Because everybody doesn't have a facility of MRI. If you start doing MRI in all chest pain, it's just not possible. Does they help in suspecting or diagnosing myocarditis?
Yes, sir. TROP-I and TROP-T, CPK-MB, these are the cardiac marker which suggest that there's a injury to the myocardium or heart muscles. So if, the studies which have come up which says that any patient with these cardiac marker has high mortality. But we won't say it's a ACS unless there's a classical STT changes also there and chest pain. So there is 3 markers are there. So, but someone has a cardiac marker high and they have a typical chest pain and all, STT changes are not there. We do say it's a myocarditis may be there, and echo may give you a global hypokinesia type of things. So this may give you a clue, and we can go for a further imaging or a maybe MRI later on. But initially, I won't say, sir, I'm not saying that first day we go for a contrast MRI. It's the last thing, patient not improving. But TROP-T and TROP-I do give prognostic markers, sir. Patient die if they have these markers are high. Even MIS syndrome, MIS adults and children. Patient who has TROP-I, TROP-T high, they have a higher mortality. While even if they have a pro-BNP high, but TROP-T, TROP-I negative, they have a lesser mortality.
So Ghanshyam, I hope you have come across post-vaccine myocarditis, which occurred after Pfizer vaccine, and some young military recruit died also, and this was so COVID inflammation, whether vaccine related or otherwise, does cause myocarditis, which leads to arrhythmias, tachycardia, also pericarditis, and sudden deaths, as I mentioned that after the exercise. So I'm just commenting that, anybody coming with the chest pain should not be ignored. No, it does happen with COVID, so don't worry about it. You have to take a detailed history. Of course, you look for pneumothorax, pneumomediastinum, and pleuritic involvement, which is uncommon with COVID. But the cardiac involvement must not be ignored, because even the young people do get myocarditis and arrhythmia, pulmonary embolism, and myocardial infarction. These are the three causes of sudden death. Here I would invite comments from the members. Anybody has any experience or the comments on chest pain and cardiac involvement, I would welcome that before I go to the next.
Myocarditis, can I say one statement, sir? Sir, this vaccine.
Yeah, Ghanshyam, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. That the vaccine-induced myocarditis, which you have highlighted, is more of a major problem with Pfizer vaccine. It is like we don't have a Pfizer vaccine, so we don't have much of those data. But after review of those data by NIH, they say after 33 million vaccine of Pfizer, only 700 to 1,000 cases of myocarditis has been seen. But these patients were very young and adults, so they are giving vaccine to 12 to 18 years also, while we are giving only to 18 years. So this is a concern for young patient. So whenever our vaccination is opened up for young patient, this problem may crop up for those patients. But above 18 elderly, it's less likely a problem. And we don't have a much of these myocarditis with Covaxin and Covishield. Luckily, we don't have. But maybe this may come up later on.
So any member has any comments to offer on cardiac involvement or experience to share?
Yes, this is Dr. S.V. Kulkarni from Mumbai.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I have seen many patients who come with a lot of postural tachycardias and postural arrhythmias, and it's sometimes very difficult to differentiate whether it is a syncope or it is just a tachycardia which is causing these problems. And it is very disturbing for them. That affects their recovery and that affects their physiotherapy also. Is there any way in which we can manage it?
So, Dr. Ghanshyam has already narrated everything about it. One should start with the simple things like ECG, and then, of course, added by cardiac enzymes. And if they don't give you an answer, if they want to pick up arrhythmia, the Holter monitoring, and then a detailed cardiac MRI will pick up myocarditis. Finally, MRI is a sensitive investigation which we do, and we have more experience with. Like I have experience with sarcoidosis, less with other kind of myocarditis. So thank you very much for your comment. So now I go to the last part before we talk about third wave briefly, is secondary infections in COVID. So Dr. Agam, we always talk about COVID infection, COVID inflammation, pneumonia. What kind of secondary infections of the lung can be there?
We were worrying, sir. In fact, at the beginning of this COVID pandemic, I wrote an article on when dark forces collide. Of course, I wrote it with Dr. Udvadia, and we were worried that probably we may see tuberculosis going crazy. We thought that probably we would see all respiratory disease going haywire, but luckily that did not happen. Steroid came as a game changer, and probably steroids utility in COVID made things little simpler. But yes, we do see fungal infections now. I'm sure everybody here has seen fungal infections. We fear that probably with a lot of usage of this kind of biologics and very high doses of steroid. I see a lot of my colleagues using 16 milligrams of methylprednisolone 3 to 4 times a day, which is very routine practice amongst a lot of family physicians across country. And with this high doses of steroid, we would see a lot of infections. So in my limited experience, I have luckily not seen a single mucormycosis in this COVID times. I have seen ample aspergillosis in lungs, and I'm seeing bacterial infections. Yes, a difficult bacterial infections, multi-drug resistant bacterial infections.
So Ghanshyam, your
I don't know where these a lot of mucormycosis. We have 2-3 cases of only mucormycosis during our pandemic. We have around 1,000 plus cases here, but we did see these patients, and these patients are on long-term high flow oxygen. They have a lot of trauma to their nasal cavities, sinuses, and oral. So these trauma to these chronic patient, long-term oxygen, and these may lead to this chronic infection, especially mucor and fungal infection.
No, the message you have to give, when would you suspect and how would you investigate?
So message is, yes, these are the patient who doesn't improve within like 7 days. Normally 80% of patient do improve with 7 days or 10 days of therapy. We were giving steroids and anticoagulant and following with the oxygen therapy. So those patients who develop fever, whose counts suddenly rise, we should always remember that steroid does cause neutrophilic leukocytosis. So some amount of neutrophilic leukocytosis is there, and steroid also suppresses the fever and all. So those patients whose oxygen demand suddenly start increasing, their tachypnea started increasing, their new patches develop in the lungs. So those are the patients who are not improving, then only we suspect this secondary infections, and fungal infection and bacterial infection both were there, sir, during this time.
So if I'm permitted, I'll give my opinion on this.
Yes, sir, sure, sir.
Yeah, the thing is that nobody has got written on his face that he has got secondary infection. They come with fever, increased breathlessness, low oxygen. You do CT or X-ray, the shadows increase. There's a leukocytosis, and we have seen all kinds of shadows. Cavitating lesions, which we did bronchoscopy, didn't find anything, and pleural effusions, and so on and so forth. So my take is that I do investigate them. I might have burned my fingers. There was a autopsy study of 702 autopsies done on COVID patients, and only 8 patients had fungal infection of the lung. So it's not so common, because this is a solid evidence of not too high. 702 autopsies and only 8, out of which only 1 was questionable. But one should look for fungal infection. There's no questions about it. Whenever I had a cavitary lesions, we did bronchoscopies, but we did not find any fungus. I'm not saying fungal infections are not common. They are common. But what have helped me in differentiating a secondary infection from COVID infection is procalcitonin. I was never a great proponent of procalcitonin. In fact, the guidelines which we wrote in 2019, we were sort of against using procalcitonin for antibiotics for ventilator-associated pneumonia and so on. But in COVID times, if there's a lung deterioration in lung condition, there's a fever, there's leukocytosis. If there was no secondary infection, the procalcitonin was always normal. And that's my personal experience. I have no data to share at this moment. That is one. Second is that if I want to diagnose aspergillosis, galactomannan has helped me. Galactomannan in serum as well as in bar, cutoff being 0.1 and 1. That has helped me. But I have burnt my fingers in 62 years old male who came post-COVID with CRP of 300, which we thought that dysregulated hyperimmune syndrome, and he had amoebic liver abscess. In a small hospital that I worked with 200 beds, we have seen 3 amoebic liver abscess in post-COVID patients. So what message, Ghanshyam, you were giving is very important, that just because high CRP, you don't say that it is a COVID inflammation. You have to do everything to rule out other causes of fever. So here I'll invite comments from anybody who wants to share give some, because we...
Sir, can I make one comment? Dr. Ghosh, Shivendu Ghosh, Calcutta. I have got 2 typical patients. Only one point of caution here, that if the patient have persistent fever, go for the good radiology early in the part of the armamentarium. I've got one patient of very good the HSCT, which showing a reversed halo sign, which is very characteristic of your mucormycosis. I've got another patient having hemiplegia, and you cannot believe, on doing a MRI of this brain, we can find a very good sinus is very full up with mass, and which is ultimately proved to be a case of mucormycosis.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We got your point, sir.
Thank you.
There's no question that there should be low threshold for suspicion of black fungus or mucormycosis. We don't want to go into that because there's no time to discuss in detail. But we have seen mucormycosis in patients who have had diabetes and those who had transplant patients. So anybody who has features of sinusitis or nasal congestion with asymmetric headache or crusty secretion, one should do a nasal endoscopy and do necessary biopsies, and including radiology. There's no questions about it. I also have a patient who was completely treated with mucormycosis and come back with recurrence of mucormycosis despite having a sweet posaconazole thereafter. So we'll have to stop here. And finally, a brief comment before I open it for discussion from both of my eminent panelists. Agam, what do you think about third wave? Briefly.
The third wave is good for discussion. For clinicians like you and me, it does not matter whether you are in second wave, whether in third wave.
We are human beings, sir. We are
Every
affected.
patient. No, I don't think so. How would it matter whether it is second wave or third wave? We are already in third wave. We know that. We know that Kerala cases have gone like crazy. We know that Northeast India cases are increasing. I know that Maharashtra probably cases are on rise. My treatment does not change whether it is first wave, second wave, or third wave. We
Okay, so
understand this.
you are bindas as always. Ghanshyam, what do you say?
Sir, we have discussed a few lines before the program started. So third wave, our prediction is around October, November. And I feel the wave will be in between first and third wave, first and second wave. It won't be a very high wave like a second wave. And what pattern we are seeing for last 1.5 years, we are just following 2 to 3 months after the waves of US and UK. So UK and US have just started. They are almost in their third wave. So I feel after 2 to 3 months, like it's August, September, October, it will be here. And thirdly, treatment wise, Dr. Agam has already said treatment will be like same thing. We are already taken care of oxygen. We have a lot of this oxygen. So that can be taken care of. But 2 to 3 months, we will have this case, third wave, sir. This is my prediction, sir.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It was a vibrant discussion by Dr. Agam and I hand over.
किल्लानी साहब,
हाँ sir.
सर मैं एक चीज पूछनी थी आपसे कि what is the role of procalcitonin in detecting the secondary infection? Sensitivity and specificity.
No, I do not have the sensitivity and specificity. That meaning thereby that if there is a fever, leukocytosis, and worsening lung shadows, and if the procalcitonin is normal, I am away from bacterial infections. That's about it, not fungal. So that is.
May I please?
Please.
Professor Gupta from Jodhpur.
Yes, sir.
We had been talking about the infections during the COVID, all this era and COVID infections. Any data available regarding the prevalence of tubercular diseases which has been detected in the COVID patients?
I think tuberculosis incidence has gone down, whether it is patients are not coming, but because of the use of mask, universal masking, whatever it is.
Sir, any data available about this prevalence or whether it has
in post-COVID, but not to my knowledge, sir. If somebody has, I have not come across.
Second thing, sir, is there any role of steroid in the post-COVID persons? Steroid. A role of steroid in post-COVID infection whose CRP is moderately raised, but symptomatically she is or he or she is have a moderate symptoms like off and on pyrexia and weakness and all those things, can be issued to some short period of corticosteroid because the inflammatory process is going on, and with the inflammatory process we have to curtail it or subside it by the use of steroids, or what can we do in these cases? I think my opinion is just to add a 7 days, 10 days steroid, the doses with the tapering doses, of course, in the 7-10 days. In one case, I found a good result in that. What's your own opinion, sir?
So, sir, thank you very much for your comment, and I totally agree with you. One has to be cautious in not using higher dosages, and someday you have to taper the steroids and stop it. So it depends upon the symptoms of the person. tolerance, and also the CRP level and other markers that will guide the steroid therapy. There are no guidelines for giving in the situation that you are describing.
I wanted just to have your opinion regarding
No,
this.
my
What
opinion
you
is that
have
I do
done.
give small dosages of steroids, but try to taper it as quickly as possible. And in majority of cases, we are able to do it. And I might have given the homeopathic dosage of steroid, tapering up to 2.5 milligram of prednisolone for some time.
What could,
Well, we should realize, sir, sorry, I'll continue for half a minute, that those people who have received steroids for 2 months or 6 weeks time because of severe or moderate COVID, for any disease, and we have large experience of sarcoidosis and interstitial lung disease, when you stop the steroid, person feels terribly weak because of the adrenal suppression. That must be happening with these COVID patients also, but that has to be managed differently, and it should not be confused with COVID inflammation. This is absolutely my personal opinion. In interest of time, I profusely thank my seniors and my colleagues and hand over the mic. Mic is not there, but whatever, to the organizer to take it further. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Khilnani sir, Dr. Agam Vora, and Dr. Ghanshyam Pankti for a very informative, very comprehensive, and electrifying discussion. So we can take some questions from the floor. If somebody wants to ask some questions, although majority of the queries have been answered by our panelists, but if you have some doubts, we can ask some 1 or 2 questions.
There's a one comment. Third wave is likely there. At most point it will be there, though may not be having very serious impact. But the situation is that the breakthrough infections are known. In post-vaccination, breakthrough infections do occur, and death will be also there. So we have to be very serious about COVID protocol, about the vaccination, and we have to vaccinate the people who are not taking a vaccine. That's very important, because those are the sources which are the mutant sources. They will make more variants of the corona. So vaccinate the people who are not taking vaccine. COVID protocol should be maintained, and vaccination had to be there. Though vaccination, we understand breakthrough infections are there, and death will be also there. So we have to be more prepared for this. That's my message.
Girish, can I make one question?
Please go ahead.
I have a question to the panelists. We are guidelines have shown that it is enoxaparin, and enoxaparin. We have only used fondaparinux, particularly because I work in a hospital where fondaparinux is better available and probably has got much less bleeding tendency. Side effects are less. So can we use fondaparinux in place of enoxaparin in patients suffering from or thinking that may have a propensity for developing thromboembolic episodes?
Dr. Ghanshyam? Dr. Ghanshyam will take this question.
Yes, sir. Fondaparinux has been used in COVID. It will be a better than Claxane.
नहीं कर दो यार, वो तो उसका था, वो रहा इतना
Cost
क्या
effectiveness.
तो
So
हो नहीं
if
पाया.
it is available in your center, I will say you can use in place of enoxaparin or deltaparin. No issue with that. Side effect profile is better for fondaparinux, sir. Agreed, sir.
Ghanshyam, another question to Ghanshyam. You are talking of MISC and MISA in our country. What's your experience? We have lots of literature coming from outside India. What's your idea about India, about MISC and MISA? Any light on that?
So we have a very big pediatric hospital attached to us. It is called Kalavati Saran Hospital. Recently, our pediatrician has published 27 cases of MIS in children. Adult, we don't have any such cases. So they have published 27 cases. Out of them, around 7 had died because of severe MISC, while 22 do manage to survive. The observation what they gave was patient who's like TROP-I, TROP-T, these markers, pro-BNP, these markers whose markers was high, they have a high chances of mortality, and patient who's a ventilator, who are on ventilator. So these are the findings. So it's not rare in Indian setting. you have to be very cautious and you should think about MIS whenever patient with high grade fever. These patients may come with diarrhea, sir. They come with high grade fever. They may have a rash, conjunctivitis, some amount of this peripheral involvement, and they may have severe diarrhea and these systemic features. So there you have to suspect they are finding very high pro-BNP levels in these patients, suggestive of cardiac failure involvement. They have trop-I as well as D dimers are very high. So they have not found classical Kawasaki like of coronary dilatation. But these all features also, there's a COVID type of Kawasaki only. So this is there, sir. So, but
what treatment policies? What do you have done?
Recently, I think we have reviewed NEGM article in last journal by Dr. Vender. It's very good teaching with that randomized trial, which suggests that it's almost equally effective. So what our pediatrician was giving was IVIG as early as possible within 3 to 5 days. They say if you don't give, mortality is very high. So,
but results are as the very different. Is
yes,
the patient
study suggests that steroid is equally effective, equivalent to IVIG. So you can give a steroid, which we were already giving. So someone who is having hypoxia, we will give steroid. So steroid is equally effective according to latest NEGM article. But during our study in our hospital, they have given IVIG, and this study is IVIG plus steroid. So they were trying to make early diagnosis and giving early IVIG and getting an early echo done in these patients. So NEGM study will be very, very beneficial, and we can treat this patient with steroid. And number of patients are still less. I will say pediatric patient involvement is 1/10 of the normal patient. Like if we have 400 adult patients daily admitted in our adult hospital, they were having 4 to 8 patients only. So in out of them, some had MISA. So it's not pediatric population is having very high number of infection even during the pandemic time. So
adult type MIS.
We have not reported. It's a very few case reports are there, but not from our center, sir.
Thank you.
Anybody else can share their experiences from SMS Jaipur and all.
Okay.
Hello.
Sir,
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
I am Dr. Mittal from Alwar.
Yes, sir.
Sir, is there any data portal vein thrombosis post-vaccination and superior mesenteric vein thrombosis, splenic vein thrombosis and splenic infarct? There was a patient who came with portal vein thrombosis with the superior mesenteric vein with the splenic vein and with the splenic infarct post-vaccination after 10 to 15 days. Is there any data about it?
So I'm not aware of any data, but anecdotal cases are there. And as I say, I learned a lot from the webinar. So I was doing a webinar with the oncology group, and there's 5 cases were presented, and one of the cases post-COVID, post-chemotherapy patient had a big thrombus, documented thrombus in the mesenteric artery. So these clotting things do occur anecdotally anywhere in the body, but I'm not aware of any organized data in this.
Sir, yesterday.
That is why, you know, sorry, I'll just, that is why in a selected patient, there's a case for prolonged anticoagulation. You know, the patient, suppose somebody is a transplant patient, somebody is got chemotherapy, immunosuppressed, severe disease, and if they have a high D dimer, I think I'll be very liberal with continuing anticoagulation for a long time, which oncologists anyway do. So it depends upon the case to case, following all the parameters of avoiding any mishap of bleeding. The anticoagulation has to be individualized.
So government has just approved this Johnson & Johnson vaccine. This is notorious for this thrombosis only. There's a TTS syndrome, thrombosis, thrombocytopenic syndrome, which has been clearly documented with single dose of Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So we should be aware once it's available in the market, but not much with the Covaxin and Covishield. Although
Covishield, it was taken Covishield actually.
Covishield is more, sir. Thrombosis is there. MI and all, there's the documented cases of death also with the thrombosis of cardiac, and mesenteric can also occur.
Persistently high count, 30,000 and all that.
All right. So thank you very much. I think we have done enough.
Time to close, sir.
Even
close it. Thank
I
you.
think we had a
Close it.
wonderful discussion. I will
Thank you.
invite Dr. K.K. Parikh sir for his concluding remarks. And Dr.
Thank you.
Ramchandra also wants to say something. Then after that, we'll conclude, I think.
Thank you, sir. My question was already discussed that is there any comment on the post-vaccination thrombocytopenia? Because my brother got vaccine and he went to surgery because of thrombocytopenia was postponed surgery. Still the platelet counts are 80,000-90,000 after the 2 vaccines Covishield. So is there a comment from Khilnani sir from your side how to
No,
do?
but I think Dr. Ghanshyam has already answered that question, that thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura and the thrombocytopenia and thrombotic episodes are known after Covishield vaccine. So also with Johnson & Johnson, both are adenovirus vector-based vaccines. So their side effects are likely to be similar. Only thing, it has come from America, so it's a big fanfare, you know, with that. But I don't find anything very great with this vaccine. But all these Covishield vaccine have not only the thrombotic complication, but neurological complication also that include Guillain-Barré syndrome and neuropathies, and so, but they are rare, and the benefit is much more than, and on a public medicine or community medicine point of view, they are regarded as insignificant. But the person who is affected, of course, is very unfortunate.
And last, sir, what is your take about the third wave? Because I still remember in October, November, and before the second wave, you've shown that slide that we are sitting on the time bomb. That time bomb was blast in April, May.
That bomb I have shown.
And again, you
bomb-
shown that slide, sir. Again,
टाइम
you
बॉम्ब
shown-
अभी भी दिखा दिया.
So what's your take about that third wave? Why showing this time bomb again?
I thought my panelists, both panelists, have very eminently described it. But my thinking is that, sir, मैं 2 मिनट अगर ले लूँ तो MBBS में पढ़ते थे agent, host and environment. So the agent is changing. You know, you have no control on agent. The virus is mutating. The host. The India is in an advantageous position as far as the host is concerned, because Delhi has 78% seropositivity. The country has 67% seropositivity. This, of course, would vary from place to place. The environment, I take COVID environment as COVID appropriate behavior, which is actually lacking in India and is lacking in everywhere. And if you go to the villages or UP or somewhere, you know, the masks are conspicuous by absence. So summarizing it, that my thought process is that third wave would come in spurts. It will come at places where the seropositivity less, like villages, and where it has not yet been tested. As far as Delhi, Mumbai are concerned, the third wave either will not come or it will be very mild. And if you want me to give an example, like Dharavi. In the first wave, Dharavi was the center of COVID. You know, so many people died, so many. And in second wave, you could count patients on numbers. And I think 30 cases in Dharavi, the whole of Dharavi, which is the largest slum of Asia. If you extrapolate it to the whole country, so wherever the seropositivity is there, that is that we have achieved closer to the herd immunity, where there this wave will be mild. So this wave will be in spurts. Actually, the second wave is not gone. It's still there in Kerala, Odisha, Northeast, still there. So same thing would come in, but God forbid it will not come like a second wave that we saw that it will come. Having said that, the mutant are very, the second wave was, now we know, was because of the Delta. Now the Delta plus had come, now Lambda has come. Which virus? So far, none of the viruses completely evaded the vaccination immunity. There's a, Delta, for the Delta we say that if you have a single dose, then the efficacy is less, but if you have received 2 dosages, the efficacy continues to be 60%. But God forbid if some mutant comes which evades the immunity acquired by infection or by vaccination, then they are going to be trouble. But I am not a pessimist. I am optimist, but realistic. One should be prepared for third wave in spurts. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. K.K. Parikh, please.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. J.C. Khilani, Dr. Agam Vora, and Dr. Ghanshyam Pankti for a very excellent interaction and discussion. And we have discussed almost all points, including long COVID and then third wave and the positivity of antibodies. But how this 70% antibody positivity came from where? I don't think that 70% of the population have been infected. They were not even the number of vaccinated population is, we know, is so less. How this 70% antibody positivity came? I don't know. I think this may be, Dr. Khilani, what is your opinion?
Sir, actually, yes, 70% positivity is a true positivity. And
True
during
positivity.
this- during
Then
the
I think we will be,
situation-
we will not face the third wave.
Yeah,
If
that's
this
what I
is
said,
true, if this is true, 70% positivity, then probably we will have at different places, different herd immunity in different
Yes.
states and different cities.
Yes, sir.
So
As
I
I
hope-
showed in one of my slides, that zero positivity from 0.7%, it rose up to 24. And 24 से सीधा jump करके ये 67 पे आ गई. That will protect us, sir.
That's right. So thank you very much, all the delegates, my friends, my physician friends, clinicians, Ghanshyam, Agam Vora, and Dr. Khilani sir, for sparing your valuable time, giving so much time to us. Thank you
Sir,
so much. And we,
मैं हमेशा कहता हूँ I am part of you.
अरे सर बिल्कुल, पर आपको आपने इतना स्पेयर करना टाइम, आपने इतना such a lively discussion and interaction, very nice. Ghanshyam, thank you so much, Dr. Shubhendu.
बूस्टर डोज और वैक्सीन की जरूरत है क्या सर?
थर्ड डोज लगेगी सर, मैं तो बहुत पहले ही कहता था, मैं तो आज से 6 महीने पहले कहा था, मैंने कहा थर्ड डोज लगेगी, देखना।
थर्ड डोज की पक्का जरूरत है सर।
बिल्कुल।
सरकार नहीं देगी सर अभी।
सर सेम वैक्सीन और अदर वैक्सीन
अदर लगवाओ
तो बात बता दी सर। थैंक यू सर।
मोदी जी 2 ही देंगे सर, तीसरी अपने आप लगानी पड़ेगी। That is
Thank
true,
you.
sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pradyuman.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Pradyuman. Thank you, Dr. Girish Mathur, Dr. Ramchandran.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you
very
very
nice
much.
talk.
थैंक यू चुप साहब, आज बहुत लेट ज्वाइन किया आपने चुप साहब।
अरे यार मैं एक्चुअल में क्या हुआ, बिल्कुल दिमाग से उतर गया यार।
हाँ वो देख रहा था आपका रूटीन दिखाई नहीं दे रहा चुप साहब, मैंने कहा क्या
नहीं यार मैं बहुत, मेरे को एकदम याद आया, मैंने फटाफट ज्वाइन की, जब तक तो खत्म हो रहा था। गिरीश रिकॉर्डिंग भेजना ना प्लीज।
एज में हो ही जाता है ऐसा, भूलने की दिक्कत हो ही जाती है। 60 से ऊपर होगा ना डॉक्टर चुग आप?
सर मैं और गिरीश बैचमेट है सर।
अच्छा
बैचमेट क्लास 16 है सर 73 से।
अच्छा
बैचमेट है, अच्छे दोस्त है सर, हमने साथ एमडी करी है।
हाँ नहीं वो तो खैर, वो तो आपको आपके लिए डाला ही था।
चुग साहब के क्वेश्चन के बगैर कोई वेबिनार कंप्लीट होती नहीं सर, क्वेश्चन जरूरी होता है।
सर ऐसा नहीं सर सीखने के लिए आते हैं, और कोई डाउट दिमाग में रह जाए फिर क्या फायदा। शुरू
से सर क्लास में सब ज्यादा क्वेश्चन यही पूछता था।
और अच्छा डॉक्टर चिप साहब का तो क्वेश्चन और डॉक्टर शुभेंदु घोष बिल्कुल नहीं चूकते। कमेंट्स भी नहीं, और ज्वाइन करने के लिए ही ऑलवेज देयर। अपना राजस्थान के लिए तो he is the most important delegate.
Yeah, always. He's always there.
And panelist also.
Yeah, he's always there. He's always there.
Thank you, Dr. Shubhendu. Thank you.
गिरीश वो भेजना।
हाँ कल tomorrow.
वो हर एक की भेज रहे हैं सर, हम हर एक की भेज रहे हैं।
हर एक की भेज रहे हैं।
थैंक यू सर। सर आप बहुत अच्छे टॉक्स कराते हो, बहुत बढ़िया।
अरे नहीं सर,
आपके रहते हुए राजस्थान में एपीआई चमक रही है सर, बिल्कुल।
अरे
इंडिया में तो चमक रही है, राजस्थान में बिल्कुल सर। इतने बढ़िया
Please don't forget me. I am also a regular.
Dr. Kulkarni also there.
Kulkarni sir.
हाँ कुलकर्णी सर, हाँ
Sir,
ये
आप
भी
अपना मास्क
राजस्थान
उतारें,
के।
मास्क।
We are not
Yes,
able
sir.
to visit. We are not able to see your face, sir. That's why.
Yeah, this I will show you. Very nice, and it was very practical.
सर चेहरे से नकाब तो हटाओ एक बार।
Thank you, Dr. Kulkarni. Thank you so much.
एक मिनट।
ओके सर, थैंक यू सर, गुड नाइट।
अच्छा डियर,
Good night, dear.
सॉरी नकाब तो निकल गया अभी।
कोई बात नहीं,
निकल
thank
गया
you.
निकल
Now
गया
it's clear.
कुलकर्णी
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Looking smart, sir.
थैंक यू।
14 को है सर, 14 को है ना?
Hi, sir. 14th.
14th of this month, we have got acid base
ABG.
balance
ABG
webinar by Dr.
Dr. Pandya and Dr. Shekhar.
Pandya. Yes,
Sanjay
yes.
Pandya and with Dr. Shekhar.
तो परसों अपनी है सर कोऑर्डिनेटर कमेटी अलवर की।
अच्छा अच्छा, वाह, good.
तब
गिरीश
मैंने इसको सर।
गिरीश अपने यहाँ पे कॉलेज में एक एपीआई में आता था यार,
कौन?
एसिड बेस बैलेंस में बहुत बढ़िया बोलता था, गुजरात का कोई था।
वही है,
वही तो
Pandya,
है
वही है, Sanjay
पंड्या
Pandya.
पंड्या
वही है सर,
पंड्या
पांडे साहब है।
He is same person.
बहुत अच्छा बोलता था वो।
He
बहुत
is same fellow, sir. Same
बहुत
fellow.
अच्छा बोलते हैं सर वो।
वही है, राजकोट से।
हाँ, सारे बेसिक्स एकदम जीरो से लेके मतलब एकदम स्टार्ट करके बढ़िया।
14th को सुनना,
Technical।
14 सुनना उनसे।
पहले सुनते थे, अब तो बहुत साल से काम कर रहे तो अब ज्यादा समझ में आएगा क्या क्या है।
सही बात
सही।
है। ओके सर, गुड नाइट।
ओके बॉस,
गुड नाइट, थैंक
गुड
यू।
नाइट, गुड नाइट सर।